Hey everyone, I hope you're okay. And today I want to talk to you about Mother's Day, particularly those of you in this community who have a difficult relationship with your mother. Now, I think one of the most important relationships you'll ever have, apart from the relationship that you have with yourself, is the one that you have with your mother, because that relationship silently shapes how you eventually learn to feel about yourself. So when it comes to Mother's Day, and you're suddenly surrounded by a stream of messages everywhere you look that reflect this Walt Disney style relationship with a mother, the type of relationship that you didn't get, my rock, my best friend, my confidant, all of that type of messaging, when the outside world is reflecting an experience of a mother-child relationship where your mother wasn't your best friend, wasn't a comforting space for you, and instead was perhaps cold, dismissive and preoccupied, then I imagine today's going to hurt deeply. And if you are hurting or you feel sad or left out today, then that's completely allowed and it's completely valid. You know, you're not feeling sorry for yourself. You're recognizing a reality that's left an impact, a real impact on the inside for you. And I want to acknowledge all of you here inside the Braver Women community who do feel this way today. And I want to share some insights that might help you to organize your thoughts and realize that you aren't alone. I'm also going to share some of my own experiences with my own relationship with my mum, not out of bitterness, but out of balance, because there's so many women in this community who live like me in the grey area of Mother's Day, where it isn't all flowers, cards and dining out. So I want to start with this. I think the most important thing for you that I really want you to remember is that, let's talk about the balance, right? I can guarantee you that for every single post that you see from somebody celebrating what a wonderful mother they have, there's going to be just as many women out there who are feeling exactly as I've described, you know, sad, on the edges, not included. And I'm going to say something that not many people would ever say out loud, but you know me, I don't avoid the hard stuff because it needs to be said, it needs to be acknowledged. Can you imagine a day celebrating adult child survivors of parental abuse? Neither can I, because that type of celebration is not going to make money and it's not going to sell thousands of cards, is it? Just keep that in mind today. You know, nearly every client that sits down in front of me who is suffering in their life emotionally has a deep developmental wound stemming from the relationship that they had with their mother, whether they acknowledge that or not. And as kids, we don't see ourselves as the new, innocent little humans that we really are. We see ourselves as they say we are. And as we grow up, we eventually learn to care for ourselves physically and emotionally. But once again, the quality of our self-care comes from the way that we are cared for. You know, mastering the skill of emotional self-regulation, self-trust, and internal security in our lives and relationships depends to a large extent on how consistent or secure our early interactions with our mothers are. You know, kids who have emotionally reliable parents who offer reliable and predictable sources of unconditional love, comfort and strength have a lifetime advantage, I think, because those kids grow up to be adults who can eventually hold their own emotional weight. They can recover from setbacks more quickly, and they have a stronger sense of who they are and where they're headed by what really matters to them. Most people see Mother's Day, don't they, through the lens of a cultural script, you know, a day for cards that talk about lifelong support and being there for every single pivotal moment. But for me, that script has always felt like a foreign language, and I know it will for some of you here too. For me, after 45 years, I've had to build my own version of reality, one that's based on radical integrity around Mother's Day rather than, a polite performance. I come from I think it's fair to say, a fragmented, broken Irish Catholic family where there's been a consistent theme of inconsistency between my mother and my sisters. Growing up, we we walked on eggshells, and invariably, I think looking back, we've navigated ourselves around my mother's emotional fragility. That and the shutdowns where she'd stop speaking to one of us for days or weeks on end because there was something going on with her that she couldn't articulate. That and the high demands for discipline, which a lot of this was born out of her fear for judgment and a low distress tolerance. And I think an honest assessment of my childhood is that I grew up largely scared, and I felt very insecure a lot of the time, Feelings were never talked about, they were never soothed, they were never comforted. More so, it was a case of, Leanne, stop crying or I'm going to give you something to cry about. I wonder if some of you can recognise that narrative. And the result was that I can see it now from a therapeutic perspective that my sisters and I unconsciously took on certain roles to try and keep that attachment going with our mother. Roles like, the golden child, the caretaker, or the scapegoat. We'd all alternate and organise ourselves around, at any one stage, one child being more favoured than the rest. And I think looking back, it was this performance that we didn't even realise as kids that were playing out. This performance was a way that we all took on to regulate my mum's emotions. And if I'm being truly honest, that type of toxic parentification is still playing out in full colour now within the family dynamic. Not only is my relationship with my mother still really strained, my relationship with my sisters has a degree of difficulty attached to it as well. The three of us struggle to be in one another's company, and it's no surprise because of the familial roles that we were trained into as kids, I think. Now, I did have lots of happy moments in my childhood too, but if I'm honest, when a childhood has more drops of poison in the broth than it should do, these are the things that leave emotional stains on the inside that really take time to work through. And I think for me, about a decade ago at 35, I hit a definitive turning point, I would say. I stopped hoping for a version of my mother that didn't exist, and I looked at the clear evidence of our history, and I realised something. I realised that she didn't lack care. What she lacked was capacity. My existence is the less than compliant child, shall we say, the tomboy whose nature crashed against her deeply religious value system. It touched on emotions that she simply couldn't regulate at the time. And I think because I didn't fit the mould that she wanted from a daughter, I was framed as the difficult or wrong one. And as a result of that, I spent decades feeling unlovable because she was never around. She was never present for the moments that mattered in my life. And I think now at 45, I've moved on from proving my worth to taking more of a leadership role in our relationship. And I would call it managing our relationship from a distance. Because I know that's what helps her to feel regulated, and it also keeps my own growth and integrity intact. Now, don't get me wrong, I love my mother dearly and with all my heart, but I think it's important to say that two truths can be acknowledged. Two of these truths can be acknowledged at the same time. I can love her, but I can also recognise the harm that her lack of capacity has caused. So on Mother's Day, for me, I refuse to participate in the inauthenticity of sending a card, or flowers or doing any of that type of thing, because I won't sign my name to sentiments that I never received. Instead, what I choose to do is either send a text or a short call just to let her know that I love her and that we'll speak soon. And I think that is more than enough, really. That's what feels right to me. She's 75 now, and I recognise now more than ever that our time is limited. And I can see her from more of a compassionate lens, more so than I ever have done. You know, I see her struggles, I see her avoidance, I see her difficulty with her emotions and her limitations. And I also know that much of her way of being has largely been shaped by her own lack of love and her own lack of attunement growing up. You know, there's no blame, there's no resentment on my part anymore, just compassion with understanding, which, you know, I often say to her when we talk now how incredibly hard it must have been for her as a child. I want her to know that I see that. She was the youngest of 12 over in Ireland growing up, and you know, I think 10 years ago I honestly don't think I would have had the insight or the emotional balance to be able to relate to my relationship with her in this way, because for years I was just hoping all the time and wishing and praying that something would suddenly change and I'd finally get the mum that I really wanted. But I think the difference now is that I finally have the capacity to see her limitations without letting them define my value. So I don't see myself as missing out on Mother's Day. I've just replaced the cultural fantasy of a grounded, more of a grounded reality. You know, a mum, a woman, a mother who did what she could with the limited tools that she had. And I'm no longer the child looking for a mirror, looking for that validation. I'm now the adult who's provided the care for myself that she never could. Now, I'm not saying that it's easy, but it's been worth it, you know, for my own growth, for my own development. My mother's inability to love me in the way that I needed was a reflection of her own pain, not my worth. It's never been about my worth. And in many ways, what's emerged is growth, because I don't think I'd be the person I am today without some of that turmoil. I certainly wouldn't be the therapist I am today without that first-hand experience that really helps me relate and understand the experience of so many of you. So if you recognize yourself or parts of your own relationships with what I've described here today, I want to give you some reflections. I'm going to leave you with 3 reflections. Now, firstly, if today feels hard for you, I want to say let it be hard. Don't force yourself to feel something that you don't. You know, your feelings are important, and connecting to the reality of what you feel means the pain isn't a problem. It's a realistic acknowledgement of something real inside of you. And it reflects the reality of your emotional history. It matches truth. You know, there's no right or wrong way to feel. You feel what you feel, and you don't get to choose it. So witness it and acknowledge it. There's no need to try to make it go away or suddenly feel better. You know, perhaps let today be the first time you let yourself feel your pain, including anger. You know, it's okay to be angry too. Sometimes anger is a powerful reminder that you've connected to a sense of your worth that lets you know you absolutely didn't deserve how you were treated. You didn't deserve any of that. And it doesn't matter if it was a long time ago or it was in the past. What matters is feeling what's real. Because here's the thing, time lives in the body in the form of feelings. And the past has a way of prodding us in the present until we're willing to acknowledge what actually happened. So secondly, women who grew up in emotionally difficult homes often have a very sensitive internal alarm around speaking the truth about their family. And I see this a lot in sessions. Even when they speak about it respectfully and thoughtfully, I can see that part of them feels like they're breaking a rule. Now, I want to say that feeling isn't necessarily a sign you're doing something wrong by speaking out loud about your experience. It's okay to hold complexity about the relationship that you have with your mother. Many women I work with feel that if they do speak out loud, if they have this out loud acknowledgement, or even the slightest thought that sits outside the family system that they were raised in, it feels like a betrayal in some way. Now, especially if their mum is no longer with us. But I want to say to you that the two things can be true at the same time. Firstly, recognizing harm and impact, as well as the fact that you feel love for your mum too. Those things can be true. And I want you to recognize that often the feeling of guilt that you feel if you do choose to acknowledge harm is often the glue that keeps you tethered to the idea of a safe parent as a child. As a child, if you start stepping outside of that family system, there's a feeling there to remind you not to do that, because as a kid, that's what kept you safe. But I think the difference is that when you acknowledge the harm as an adult, you're effectively breaking that childhood attachment. That guilt or that betrayal feeling, if it does come up for you, it's likely a clash between your biological drive, the attachment you formed as a child to your mother for your survival, and your now perception of the truth. This feeling of complexity isn't a sign of you being wrong in any way. I want you to see it as a sign of stepping out of the system. Like I've said, love and pain can coexist together. And I think emotional maturity is about being able to hold these two realities without forcing one to cancel out the other. And I think finally, I want to leave you with this, right? Remember that you are the only one who knows how you feel about your mother. You are the most qualified person to decide how you choose to spend today. There's no right or wrong way to navigate it. Healing maternal wounds rarely happens through a single insight. It happens gradually through recognizing the patterns that formed around that relationship and learning that your emotional world is allowed to exist without constantly organizing itself around everyone else's approval, including your mother's. If you are struggling with Mother's Day, remember this, that the difficulty that you feel says far more about the complexity of the relationship that you experienced than it does about your capacity for love or loyalty. We don't get to choose our parents, but we do get to choose how we acknowledge the reality of that relationship, the impact it had on us, and who we become outside of the messages that we once carried as truths. So I hope that helps, and let me know what your thoughts are in the comments, and I'll catch up with you all in the group soon. Take care. Bye for now.